Welcome to Strength Chat Podcast, presented by Kabuki Strength. Introducing your hosts, Chris Duffin, the mad scientist of strength, Rudy Cadlow, mature athlete and coach, and the wizard of training himself, Brandon Sen.
Welcome to Strength Chat with your host, the mad scientist of strength. That's right, myself, Chris Duffin. To my right, with his giant Kabuki Strength mug, is the wizard of training, Mr. Brandon Sen.
The growler.
The growler, the protein growler. And to my far left, Dr. Rudolph.
Oh, man. You hear my stomach growl? Did you hear that on the podcast? That's hungry.
No? Maybe you could work on some diet stuff.
Maybe a vertical diet.
We'll get there. Anyway, it's been a lot of fun. We're kicking off summer here, here in Kabuki Strength. Getting all ready for the festivities of enjoyment of sun and all that.
You say that and it started raining this morning.
This week's going to be
We
raining.
all got our T-shirts and shorts on, getting ready for the sun, and it rained this morning.
Every other day for like a couple weeks, I swear, we look around the office and go, "Where's Brandon?" Pop on Instagram and he's got his computer up in front of the river.
Get that mobile hotspot. It's
no better place in the world than summer in the Pacific Northwest.
That's true.
It's pretty
That's
nice
very true.
to be here. You don't want to travel away from here during the summer. You get hard traveling in when the rains come, and we go to places like Las Vegas.
Yeah. It was 105 when I left.
Oof.
So my struggle though during the summer is the kids, entertaining the kids, since still got to work. They're running around like crazy. And I thought I had this brilliant plan the other day. I purchased this 15-foot trampoline. Mind you, we already have basketball hoop, gaming lounge, bicycles.
They don't do much of that, though.
And
It's been commandeered by the rest of us.
I know. They're
Kicked them off it all.
Yeah. I was up there just a little bit ago, and there's some smashed PBR cans on the floor.
Yeah, there's quite a few beer cans out there.
Go figure. Summer has officially started.
Smell their breath, see which one.
Yeah, that's all Briley. You got to check it.
Yeah. So anyway, I go to build the trampoline. I'm like, I'm going to go put it in the back, and I got yelled at by our shop manager, Jesse.
I wasn't here that day. I bet that was pretty funny, though.
He like freaked out on me, yelled at me. He never yells at me,
Jesse
and I'm
doesn't
like,
normally yell.
and I'm like, all right, I guess I better listen. And my kids are like, but Dad, you're the boss. You get to tell him.
That's
I'm
what they
like,
tell us too.
Yeah, if Jesse yells at me, but the thing is, I didn't confront Jesse with this, so I'll just make fun of him on the podcast about it.
Yeah, he
so
won't listen to it anyway.
I know. So it was actually like months prior. I was talking about I'm going to get a trampoline. And I was talking to Jesse about it. I'm like, I just can't figure out where to put it. I'm not going to do it. And Jesse convinced me to get it.
Of course he did.
He says, no, we can put it in the back right here, and I'll build a winch system, and we'll pull it up to the roof. And, so the whole reason.
Sounds like a lot of work.
The whole reason I bought it is because Jesse convinced me to, and then he yelled at me later. So anyway.
Well,
I did find a home.
Well,
I did find a home.
So
The
then
spot
then you worked me to put it on the gym floor. Then
okay.
But I always relinquish. Figured out a way.
Just for frame of reference, the original spot he was planning on putting it was in a machine shop where there is lots of shards of metal everywhere.
It might have been right by where they're like cutting and welding, possibly.
It was right by that.
Could have been a really bad idea.
One of the kids are going to fall into the Masonac and get turned into a shoulder rock.
They have to wear their eye
Masonac?
safety gear just to use the trampoline.
You need to spend a little more time back there.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Mazak.
Mazak?
Yeah.
Whatever.
You put a little.
I just tell people how to
extra
use it.
syllable
I
in
don't
there.
build it.
It's like Brandonac.
I saw the post on Instagram. My first thought was, how long until the first injury? And Chris told me this morning you've already had the first injury.
Yep.
That didn't take long.
So our guest, welcome to the show.
I'm here too.
We also have Stan. So
Stan's here.
And I won't be using the trampoline.
So
I stay in my
speaking
lane.
of summer break, Stan is enjoying a little summer break by doing a mixture of work and family festivities.
That's
right?
the beautiful thing about the iPhone and the business that we're in is that you're never too far away from work.
The good thing and the bad thing.
Yep. So we did seminars. Did a seminar up at Big Gabe Moan's G Standard Gym up in Tacoma, and then took a tour of Seattle yesterday. And that was the Duck Bus, went out on Lake Union, and then top of the Space Needle. and then drove down here last night so we could meet up with you. And today will be the zoo, and then we'll head out to Multnomah Falls. And just a whirlwind week. We're going to see Mount Hood, Lake Billy Chinook. We're going to go to the Tillamook Cheese Factory, up to the beach, Cannon Beach and Seaside Beach. And just do all the things that I did as a kid, because I grew up right here in Portland.
Yeah, I kind of forget it from time to time. I'm like, it's like, yeah, Stan is a Portland native, grew up right out here. So,
Yeah.
So for those of our listeners who are listening and not viewing, this is Stan Efferding, the Rhino. That's who we have here. We didn't mention his last name, so people assume.
I just said Big Stan. I thought
you're like Elvis, so it's
Yeah,
one
yeah,
name
thank
is Stan, right? So it's good to, yeah. So Stan went to Aloha High School here, just
I
right
did.
Out in Beaverton, Aloha area. And left and did you go to?
I went to the University of Oregon, so it was back in '85 that I
he's
graduated
a
from
Duck,
high school.
too. See
Yeah,
that? So
went to
he's
U of O.
true blue, true green Oregon guy.
Yeah, things have changed so much. Of course, everybody says that, but all those many years ago, it was. I mean, we used to go out to Hillsborough to pick strawberries. It was all just farms, and now you've got the airport and all.
yeah, you were talking about growing up off of 185th, and yeah, back in the 80s, that was just like farmland. Now it's like completely like there's.
It's crazy. We drove by the Nike
real
campus
estate
today.
developers came in and just ruined the landscape.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Dang it, Rudy.
Yeah.
Didn't you build a giant community out there?
Renko Station. Yeah, that's our community.
Well, that that Nike is building some more stuff out there. They've got 6 cranes out there, huge cranes,
wow.
and they've got them expanding their campus. And
Yeah, and Intel has got. Yeah, have you been by the Intel campuses lately?
Not lately,
it's
no.
just crazy.
yeah. In downtown Seattle, of course, we were by the Amazon area, Amazonia, whatever they refer to it as now. So
Right.
seems like they're taking over. And then Google down in Venice is expanding and buying property there and building. So it's crazy how much development's going on here.
Yeah, Google has a big plant down in the Dalles.
Speaking of growing, though, the biggest growth has to be like last time I think Stan was at our gym to where it is now.
Yeah.
Not quite 10 years, but
First
I
time I've
remember
been to the
Stan,
new
remember Stan came by
about
a little hole in the wall we had
Yeah.
over on Harold Street.
and
Yeah,
squatted.
remember that?
Yeah.
You did. With my training partner who had just moved here from Cincinnati, John Hare, and he was struggling to keep up with you. Of course, he's about maybe 10 years your senior than as he is now. But
And now I'm the senior.
I think he kept up. Well, you're not quite a senior as some of us in the room.
Yeah, I watched Chris pulling the other day, and I'm like, how does he still do that? And then I remember he's still a young man by
that's right.
by my
I'm-
standards.
I'm still in my 40s. So
Yeah.
So
What are you,
And-
49 now?
no, 41. Man. I've got a long ways.
The problem with Instagram
Stan,
is
you
I
just turned 50, right?
I did. I just turned 50,
That's good.
and I see stuff
Look
going
good.
on. I see young cats and doing stuff, and then I think that I can still do that, and I run to the gym and I give it a whirl, and next thing you know, I'm limping out of there. I wake up the next morning in traction, and so I'm trying to be a little smarter these days, and just help others kind of perform at their peak.
When we'll get to that kind of like helping others here in a little bit because you've got a lot going on out there right now in that regard. But I get these comments quite a bit from people that that they follow me, they follow you or Mike O'Hearn or whoever, and they're like, just the fact that seeing you guys like still out there like after it, looking good, walking the walk when most people like kind of think about like, oh, I had somebody the other day message me saying, am I past my peak? Should I be looking at coaching with you guys? I'm like, how old are you? And he's like, I'm 26. I'm like,
Yeah, still got milk on his breath.
Look around a little bit. But then I see other people that are, they use that as inspiration, knowing that to play the long game, that it's not. It's not 3 months or 6 months from now or 2 years from now. Like, you can still be, active in doing things. And obviously, we've got Dr. Rudolph over here at undisclosed age.
I'll disclose it.
We have to cut his leg off and count the rings.
He's going to be next year. He's excited. He's turning 70, and we'll be working on a whole new set of records.
A whole new set of world records.
That's
Yep.
great.
Yeah.
But it's great because Stan, you've competed at a high level in both bodybuilding and powerlifting. One of the rare athletes that have been able to do that. And but today you're still giving back to the industry, and I think that's great. And of course, the big thing right now is the whole vertical diet, and it seems to be sweeping the world by storm. How did that all come about?
You know, I've been using that nutrition program with my athletes for years. It was a lot of the stuff that I learned when I got back into competition back in 2008, 2009, and hooked up with Flex Wheeler. Learned a lot from training with Flex and his nutritional program. And so what I tried to do was use that with my athletes for years, all the lessons that I had learned. And then it was probably connecting with guys like Hofthor and Brian Shaw and a few, Larry Wheels and Dan Green and the likes. And when they started talking about using that program, then people started asking me more and more for training. And I just put together, when an athlete comes to me, I send them as much information as I can in as easy to follow format as I can. And that was the same document I sent Hofthor 2 years ago, is the one that I posted 3 months ago for everyone to utilize. And it was pretty comprehensive. It's not just a diet. It's sleep and sleep hygiene. It's hydration. It's, of course, nutrition. And then a lot of it has to do with their gut health, their immune system, their energy levels, so we can improve their digestion and make them feel better, improve their insulin sensitivity. All of those things is things that I focused on, and some of it, or a lot of it, was very effective for them. And so when I had posted it up there for clients to use, I started getting an enormous amount of positive feedback from people, not necessarily just about PRs in the gym, but it was about, hey, I was able to get off of antacids or medication for GERD and acid reflux, or hey, my blood pressure went down, or hey, I'm a type 1 diabetic and I have to use half the medicine I used to use, or I was, type 2 and now now my blood sugars have come down. My digestion is improved. I had, all sorts of digestive issues. And now my stomach feels flat and I'm able to digest my food. I don't have all the gas and bloating and all those other issues. So those became, I think, the driving force, is that people started feeling better in a very short period of time. Performance obviously takes time, particularly for an intermediate and advanced lifter to make improvements. Hofthor, it took him quite a bit of time. He felt better immediately, but over the course of the 2 years that I've been working with him, he went from a 940 deadlift to 1,040. And that was it's a gradual process, but almost within a matter of days, people started feeling better. And that's what started coming out on the internet as far as the vertical diet, is just that I feel better. And there's so many aspects to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So tell us about what's the significance of the vertical diet?
Well, first of all, I wanted to focus on building a foundation for people. You can't put a 3-bedroom house on a 2-bedroom foundation. And I was concerned that so many people were focusing on macronutrients and not micronutrients. And they were having deficiencies in hydration, sodium to begin with, potassium, calcium, magnesium. I was concerned that they were having deficiencies in micronutrients, and that a lot of the macronutrients they were consuming weren't optimal for digestion, particularly with a lot of the women that I was working with for bikini figure physique, and a lot of the huge powerlifter, bodybuilder, off-season and strongmen guys having a hard time eating all that food. And we all know what it's like. We've been there when we dirty bulk, or we're trying just mass for mass or calories for calories. And a lot of stomach problems occurred. And so I wanted to get away from macros in terms of it fits your macros and start to go a little beyond that in terms of, well, how is this food affecting me? How is the food affecting my digestion, my immune system, my general health, my energy levels? And so what I wanted to do was create that foundation first. And I called that my foundation, my horizontal foods that I choose, and make sure that everybody's getting all their micronutrients. And then I build that vertical axis based on the demands of the individual. That's when I was talking about how I was eating over 3 pounds of red meat a day and I was eating 600 grams of carbs a day. For someone like Hofthor or Shaw or Dan Green or Larry Wheels, they need to consume a lot of calories. And I can't do that. I can't put a lot of calories in them if they're getting a lot of bloating and gas, and they're rejecting the foods and they aren't absorbing all of it. And so I stayed really simple, and I built those calories using red meat and white rice primarily. And that's kind of, initially everybody said, oh, it's the red meat and white rice diet. Well, some people never get there. They don't need 600 grams of carbs. They don't need 3 pounds of steak a day. It's the foundation that folks who haven't actually read the diet don't understand how comprehensive it is, in how broad it is in terms of all the food sources that I include in it. And
So
so
you use the term like, I think it's called bioabsorbable. Is that the
bioavailable, like heme iron and steak.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna, and it's a good, better, best scenario. If I'm gonna feed somebody a protein source, I want that protein source to have the most nutrition possible. And so if I choose steak over chicken, it's for that very reason. I don't choose it based on cost, which is what most people do. And I don't choose it just to satisfy their protein demand. You could just as easily satisfy a protein demand with steak as chicken. But what else are you getting with it? And with steak, you get the heme iron, you get the B12, you get the zinc, you get the creatine.
So these are the micronutrients that you don't just get taking a multivitamin.
Not the synthetic multivitamins.
Right.
No.
Yeah, it's definitely been a learning experience for me, like discovering that the difference between getting food-based micronutrients and supplementing is
huge,
pretty big.
Yeah.
Just some minor changes can have a pretty big impact.
Yeah.
What's your view? Because like pork, for example, has some pretty good micronutrients.
It is.
As well.
It's good.
So,
I never was a big pork eater. I like some bacon here and there, but just because some of this stuff, I make these decisions. I always say that I don't eat foods I like. I eat foods that like me, and I make that decision about an hour after I eat my meal, and see how it feels on my stomach. And that's what I ask my clients. How does that feel on you? The questionnaire that I give my clients initially is what foods feel good for you, what foods make you strong, what foods are effective for you. And when they tell me, then I can take a look at those. But pork certainly has a ton of good micronutrients in it. There is some concern that there's some changes in the blood if you don't properly prepare it. And curing it, like bacon, does that, helps with that. Oddly enough, people have been so afraid of bacon, but it's very micronutrient dense, very powerful in terms of its performance benefit. You just got to remember, first of all, there's a calorie equation, and bacon can be pretty calorie dense, and so you kind of got to watch how much fats you take in just because of the calories.
I was thinking something like a pork tenderloin that's like a really lean cut of meat.
Excellent
really
source. I'll defer to the folks from the Weston A. Price Foundation. They talk about how you prepare it matters. And sometimes they like to see that cured in some sort of vinegar or something so that it's pre-digested for you. And if people have a problem with pork products, then I'll try and suggest that. Same thing if they have a problem with grains. With oatmeal, I'll get them to ferment it overnight with some apple cider vinegar or yogurt, and that way it's pre-digested, it's fermented. Same thing with bread. I choose to go instead of eating a whole ton of bread because it'll bloat you. Same with pasta. I might have them use a sourdough bread because it's fermented. It's the way it's prepared. Same with legumes. I'm not a big fan of beans for that same reason. All the anti-nutrients, the lectins and the phytic acid. But if you prepare them correctly by soaking them, then it's going to reduce that impact on your digestion. So I start there. Running out and grabbing a burrito or running out and grabbing IHOP and eating a bunch of pancakes or having a pizza.
Burritos are so good.
Yeah, they are delicious.
We have a burrito problem here, by the way. So just on a side note, there's a really authentic Mexican place right around the corner.
Yeah.
It's trouble.
And another challenge is that a lot of those, the tortillas are made with trans fats or a lot of vegetable oils. And I try and stay away from those because you start to skew your omega-6 to omega-3 ratios. And those vegetable oils and those omega-6s in general, a lot of inflammation, a lot of increase in estrogen. So I'm really cautious about the types of foods I eat. A, for digestion, B, for how they respond, how your body responds to them, and see if I can't optimize some of those areas, a lot of those areas, by putting out a diet that feels good on your stomach, that seems to give you more energy, easier to digest food, and then has all those micronutrients in it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of like classical foods that people think about as being very healthy. Like this is a bodybuilder diet would be based on broccoli and brown rice and oats, and like these are all things that
and egg whites and boneless, skinless chicken breast and
that kind of slow things down. Post workout got to have the bananas. The other which is slow to digest. So it's really interesting when you start like exploring because a lot of this is off of like the FODMAP principle.
The FODMAP principle, a lot of Ray Peat's work, a lot of Dr. Ray Peat's work that I've been reading for years now. Weston A. Price Foundation and Dr. Weston Price, who in the 1920s and 30s traveled all over the world and looked at the diets and the health of the individuals through, he's a dentist, so he looked at their teeth and their jaws and the structure as based on the diets that they ate. And so a lot of this does come, I didn't invent any of this.
I think that's a really good point, because I've seen some people, saying, oh, well, this is nothing new. Stan's like just making a book to sell some money off of what bodybuilders are doing. And I'm like, nobody, it's really good information, and nobody's put it together and made it readily available.
Yeah.
You're not stealing from, you've been very vocal about like, I've learned from this person, I've learned from that person, I've researched this, like, I didn't invent this, but I've pulled together these resources and put it together to help people out, because it's, where else is it?
And not everybody
You've got to find the right person that hopefully knows it.
You do.
Hire them as a coach, and you don't know. If
Bingo.
you don't know, you don't know. So
to have the time and the money to gather all this information or get exposed to it or learn from it, obviously I come up here and train with you. I go down, I train with Flex Wheeler. I've been out to Chicago, train with Eddie Cohn. I've worked with just about every guru in the business. I've traveled all over the world. And I've spent a ton of money and a ton of time that a lot of people don't have. And so like you do, you consolidate great information and you give it to people so that they don't have to try and learn this for themselves or go get a degree in one thing when you need to learn 10 things.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to bring all these resources to the table for yourself. When I run a business, I have to hire an IT guy, and I have to hire an attorney, and I have to hire a CPA. I can't learn all that myself and do that. I get professionals in the industry. So I reach out to people like you, people like Craig Knuckles, and people like Flex Wheeler, and a host of other, the list goes on and on, of people that I've learned an extraordinary amount of information from. And then I try and get takeaways from that. I can't get into the weeds like Dr. Rhonda Patrick does and discuss, all the mechanisms of action, and I'm probably never going to understand any of that as well as these individuals. But I can draw from their information and create these takeaways and compile it into a very usable, simple, sensible, sustainable.
Because a lot of times, if you're reading the research or talking to some of the people at that level, it can be hard to distill out of that, like, okay, what is the action I'm supposed to take? How do I actually put this together if I'm an athlete and training?
Yeah.
And what does this look like in the real world?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing. And that's like an important thing of what we do as well, because it's theory and
application are two different things.
Like
Yeah, and I've obviously, from my own experience, I talk a lot about, and I went to college, I studied exercise science. I've learned a lot after all these years. I still study it. I'm enrolled into the dietetics program at UNLV, so I'll, in an effort to continue to ongoing education.
Yep.
I went to Alan Aragon and Brett, I guess Schoenfeld wasn't there. It was, who's my glute guy? Brett
Contreras.
Contreras, yeah. And there was a host of other great people there, and I went and learned from them. I've obviously been to the seminars that Chad Wesley Smith puts on and his group, and they're an excellent group. I even went down and did Dave Palumbo's seminar. I flew all the way to Florida and paid like everybody else to sit there and listen to Dave Palumbo for 10 hours, which was a great experience. He's a smart guy. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that everybody says, but there's no end to the amount of learning that you can do. One time in a podcast or a seminar or something, I mentioned Gary Taub's book. I think it was Good Calories, Bad Calories, in his book. And it's an extraordinary book, and he's an extraordinary researcher. And he puts together, there's got to be 50 pages of scientific information there. Now, I don't agree with the insulin hypothesis.
Right.
But
some of the stuff's pretty controversial.
Some of it's pretty controversial. But the 120-year history that he goes through is much similar to the work that Mary Enig and Sally Fallon do for the Weston A. Price Foundation to go over this historical list of how decisions have been made in this industry which weren't always based on the evidence and the science. A lot of times it's going to be based on the money and what it's focused on, and that comes from whether it's government or whether it's some financial interest, whether it be the grain industry or whether it be the oil industry. They're all industries, and whoever seems to be paying the bill, that seems to be what's driving the literature. But the point being is that I've learned a lot of things from a lot of people who I don't necessarily agree with their conclusions, but there's a lot of great information out there that I want to try and bring to folks that they can apply, like you said, to find some sort of application, things they can do every day. Because for me, consistency was key. And now that we have all this great information, what are you implementing? What are you actually doing on a daily basis? And what are you prioritizing is what becomes important. Because some people get lost in the weeds worrying about loading creatine when they're only sleeping 5 hours a night. That's just a blatant example.
Yeah.
And there's more and more and more as you get down the list of whether consistency is more important than intensity, whether calories is more important than the types of calories. They're all important, but what's the priority? And are you actually implementing it, or do you get distracted on these gimmicks and tricks and trying to game the system? These hacks, and there aren't any hacks. There aren't any tricks.
I hate that this biohack and that that whole mentality.
Yeah.
Like the body does what it's going to do. There's no trick to There's definitely things that we can do that have a very serious effect.
Yeah.
But you're not working with a mechanism to make it do something that it's not meant to do.
No. And also people try and pursue these dramatic changes, and that's not the way the body responds. And whether it's these extraordinary workouts, which the body doesn't respond to any single workout, it's coupling together a cumulative effect of many, many workouts over many, many months or years that actually gives you the progress. There's no one workout, no special set and rep scheme or percentage of 1 rep max thing that you can implement over a short period that's going to make a significant difference. And the same thing is true of nutrition. Everybody's worried about their muscle protein synthesis and spiking things, and the body doesn't respond to spikes. It needs what it needs when it needs it, and it needs it consistently. And if you only do it 5 days a week and then you take Friday and Saturday night off, that's no different than if you only train once every 2 weeks. It's just not going to have the same impact as if you're consistent about it.
On the other hand, and I'll argue this point because I definitely have the consistency and discipline when it comes to training, sleep, a lot of other good factors. Laugh on the sleep.
Sleep.
Man, I nail it.
He does nail it more than anyone.
Spends half his life asleep.
That's what I did this weekend, by the way. I slept. I took about 3 naps a day, slept 10 hours a night.
It is probably necessary, but it's still comical.
Got to get my that's my pre-training nap couch right there.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I'm not so consistent on the diet. But I have been implementing pieces of very similar philosophy to exactly what you're talking about. And my gut health has gotten so much better. It's improved the quality of sleep because I used to get up to go to pee 5 or 6 times a night, and that's gone. Just overall, even putting some of the principles in place, it does work.
Yeah.
Am I netting the whole effect of it? No, because
you're not perfect.
I'm not perfect.
Okay, I said it.
But anyway, that was just my counterpoint to
and
that.
it doesn't have to be perfect.
So.
It's just a matter of, are you trying to optimize? Like I said, it's a good, better, best scenario. And at least getting something is better than nothing. And then from there, you start to optimize. If you went 10 hours without food in the middle of the day, you're going to start to have performance problems.
But like you said, it's foundational. If you can get a good, solid foundation of nutrition, that's the way to go. And so the vertical is, how do you build on that foundation?
Yeah. Well, another big thing about the foundation is that when you have a deficiency in anything, then your performance is going to suffer.
Yeah.
And what I've tried to do is get the back away from the macro discussion and start getting into, well, maybe there's some deficiencies because you aren't focused on, obviously we've done a lot of talk about sodium and how important that is for performance.
Really interesting. People think salt's bad for you, sodium's bad for you, but
it's still pervasive.
Yeah.
It's
myth.
It's huge.
Yeah.
But it was interesting in the discussion about how important it is for athletes because you can't perform well without it.
Huge. I think it's important for everyone's health, and the science bears that out. 3 to 6 grams of sodium per day is an optimal range for health. You get below that, and you have this enormous spike in all-cause mortality. And you get above that, and if you take out the groups that are salt sensitive, even when you get above that, there's kind of a fan where some people might even have better health outcomes, and others, it might be based on whether or not their potassium or calcium is low that they have any adverse effects. And so those are the things I address.
I have a question on that one, too, because I've definitely seen an improvement with maintaining, and I just anecdotally knew that a long time ago.
Yeah, but whether or not you implemented it consistently was right.
But I've made sure salt's been in my diet for a long time, just because. I could tell the impacts 15 years ago.
Yep.
When nobody was talking about this, and but there's a certain point, and I don't know what the point is, and I'm wondering if you have read any of the research and know where if you have too much salt, that you basically flush a lot of the gut.
Absolutely.
The gut microbiome, and we're talking about the microbiome being important, but then sodium, making sure we've got the sodium load, which can potentially have a negative effect on...
Too much of a good thing, Even my own training partner ran right home when I did my salt rant and loaded himself full of salt. Next thing you know, he's running to the bathroom, pissing out his ass. And that's what's going to happen.
Nice picture.
It's too much of a good thing.
That was me in my last
And
competition.
I wish I had an exact answer for that, but you can't paint with a broad brush, and everybody's different. And you know what? The experts don't have an answer for that either. When you talk to Dr. D. Nicolantonio and look at his research, or Dr. Sandra Godek from the Heat Institute, she's a thermoregulation specialist, PhD. Salt to taste is their recommendation.
Yeah.
Salt your food. If it tastes palatable, then you're probably doing pretty good. If it's too salty, your body will tell you. If it's not salty enough, you should also know that it's bland. I'd say but the general population has been told so much that salt's bad for you that they shoot for bland food.
Probably because of foods it's associated with, right? Fried food and things like that.
Bingo. And packaged food tends to have a lot of salt in it. The problem is when you get rid of canned food, when you start getting rid of those foods, when you go to, say, clean eating, and I'll just use that as a general term, generally you're not eating as many packaged foods, you're not eating as much fast food, and so you're creating a salt deficiency. That's one of the things that you're foregoing with all of the fat and chemicals and all that other stuff, is you're foregoing salt. And so you need to add that back in. And that's what happens a lot of time with these people that diet for physique shows, is that they end up, they over-restrict with these egg whites and chicken breast and broccoli, and they don't add salt back in, and they end up in this deficiency state. Then their energy levels suffer, and then, of course, the performance as well.
Brandon and I have talked about this because he did a couple water cuts a few times, and it was really clean eating going in, and I'm like, you need to supplement with something to make up for that, or you're going to be hurting. And I mean, you can just feel it as you get close to the competition from the water load.
Drained, even if you're eating normal.
Exactly. And then day of competition, you got dead legs. You're just like, performance is just not there, and you're like, what's wrong?
Well, this happened a couple years ago, even with Dan Green, when I was working with him. He said. He hit me up one day and said, I just had to go. I was feeling tired. I was exhausted. I had to go load up I had to get some carbs. I went and got some French fries at McDonald's or whatever he said at the time. And I'm like, it wasn't carbs. It was salt. He started clean eating. He started cleaning up his diet, and it was salt he was chasing. This is, what's interesting is I put out that salt rant like 2 years ago, and it was probably the biggest amount of feedback I got on any single rant at the time. And there were two schools of thought. There was those people who said, "Are you going to kill people? They're going to, get high blood pressure. They're going to die of heart attacks, et cetera, et cetera." And then there was the folks, the vast majority of them, who said, "Oh my God, my life just changed. My performance improved, immensely." People talking about 40-pound PRs in a week or two, and their lifts. Powerlifters. Every time I go to powerlifting meet, they'll come up to me, and that's the first thing they say. "Oh, dude, when I started eating salt, man, everything started changing. I started recovering better, training better. I didn't hit the wall when I was training." And what's interesting is that more recently, there's been a significant amount of this in the work that I've done for the athletes that I've worked with. In Manila, for the World's Strongest Man, both Brian Shaw and Hafthor Bjornsson, it was really hot there and humid. And so we had to set up I had to set up a hydration protocol for them. And I sent them an actual protocol where and a lot of this stuff, I got from Dr. Godek's research and that of Dr. D. Nicolantonio's, and then my experience for what worked for my stomach is I tried to hydrate myself both before and after competition. And a couple hours before or 3 hours before an event or at a meal, I would put plenty of salt on the food that I ate. And that food would necessarily have carbohydrates in it. It seems that when you salt food with carbohydrates, it's a better absorption. And it's recommended. It's recommended by the Heat Institute and others that you want to salt your food. I talked about taking Nun tablets at one time, or taking hydration tablets, buffered salt tablets, etc. But as it turns out, that's not nearly as effective to get your salt in water because you're diluting it to such a degree that you're not going to get any benefit from it necessarily.
It also doesn't seem to.
Doesn't taste good. It's
well, it just I don't know how to, for the gut, when you don't have that carbs with it.
You need the carbs with it.
Yeah.
Yep, and that'll help shuttle it. Obviously, there's some of that's going to end up in the muscles with the glycogen and the water that ends up in the muscles, so you're going to have the sodium. But it's going to be better distributed through the body, and this is the recommendations of the professionals. And so when I applied it that way, and I have them salt their food, that's what I say now. They talk about how many Nun tabs and when, and I'm like, no, salt your food. First and foremost, salt your food, and a carb source is optimal. And even things like a Gatorade that has salt in it and glycogen, has some sugars in it, it's not, you can't get enough salt in there. It wouldn't be palatable. If it were effective, it wouldn't be palatable. And so you do need to salt your food. And then just before and after an event, and this is depending on the amount of time, I worked also this year with Camille LeBlanc, a former CrossFit National Championship champion, Ben Smith, Becca Voigt. These are all people who have now on the vertical diet, and I've worked with them with her hydration. And I sent them protocols for regionals so that when each event, based on the time of the event, if it's a 45-minute event and they're with a lot of workload, I want to give them a little more salt before and after. If it's a 7-minute event, then I'm not necessarily as aggressive with it. And so what I would do, and this is the same with Hofthor, it's the same with the CrossFit group, I would have them to take half a teaspoon of pink salt and put it on their tongue within 15 to 30 minutes before the actual event, and wash that down with maybe 3 ounces of orange juice and 3 ounces of water, because I wanted to get the glycogen in there as well, and the carbs, and then maybe a quarter a cup of rice, white rice. All of this was really easy on the system. It gave them the necessary salt that they needed. And I would do that before each event. If they had 3 events, they would do that before each of 3 events. And then depending on the duration of the event, after the event, I would have them take in sodium. More recently, I had the opportunity to work with, and a lot of this information comes from George Lockhart, and he's the trainer, the nutritionist for Conor McGregor. He used to be John Jones's nutritionist, but he's been the nutritionist for probably 30% of all the UFC fighters right now. He's doing the nutrition for, and he does the water cuts for the athletes. And some of them get a hold of him a month out, and some of them, like Yoel Romero, only got a hold of him a week out from the weigh-in, and shows up at 209, and it's his job to get him down to 185, and it's an extraordinary process. And I had the opportunity to go to Chicago, and I stayed with George and his team. And they had a clinic, and they had 8 students there who were also nutrition-oriented type of trainers. And I spent the whole week, and we went through the whole process, taking 7 different athletes, cooked all their meals for them every day, all week long, and did their water depletions and reloads. And a lot of this was centered around this obviously loading going in, lots of sodium, lots of water going in, trying not to get the body to be dehydrated, and releasing vasopressin and starting to hold on to salt. So we had to load them going in. But when we rehydrated them, much the same way as the CrossFit athletes, much the same way as Hofthor, when we rehydrated them, it was basically salt, glycogen, and water. And there's potassium as well. It's very important, trying to get that balance back. And the fact that you can't absorb too much at one time. The body can take in, like with glycogen, about 1 gram per minute. Now, there's some research that suggests if you mix that glucose or that dextrose with fructose, you could get up to almost 2 grams per minute. If you mix salt with that, you can get up to almost 3 grams per minute. And if you mix some caffeine with that, you can get up to almost 4 grams per minute. And so there is a benefit to combining some of these nutrients to get more absorption faster. And then they have them drink it relatively slowly, over 10 to 15 minutes if they can, because they're not going to be able to absorb all of it if they drink it at once and cause discomfort to their stomach. And so we're focused on all those things, just like you said. You can't take in too much salt because it'll bother your stomach. That's the kind of thing that I spell out in the vertical diet, and I spell out to my athletes is let's be careful how much we take in and how fast, and under what circumstances we're using it, before or after training, so the ability of your body to utilize it. But I've been exposed to just some unbelievable information. Also, when Ben Smith, a month before regionals, people don't know this story, and I hope Ben doesn't mind if I share it, but a month before regionals, yeah, it's going to happen. He ended up suffering from heat stroke. He went out and trained on a really hot day, did like a 45-minute workout, and had heat stroke. Came home and he was cramping and he was nauseous and the whole 9 yards. Interesting thing about heat stroke, people think it's a problem with water, whereas really the most prevalent causes are genetics, a history of heat stroke, and then level of conditioning, which is why you get more problems with heat stroke at the beginning of football season when everybody starts doubles as opposed to 4 to 6 weeks into daily doubles, is just your level of conditioning. And he had one of his most intense workouts in the heat that he'd had in a while, and he suffered from heat stroke. And so recovering from that, obviously you want to get back in the sodium, get back in the potassium, but I hadn't been working with him too long prior to that and hadn't done any specialized hydration work for Ben until he reached out to me and said, look, I just suffered from heat stroke, and he mentioned that he'd suffered from that a year prior, and so he obviously has a history of that. And a lot of people sweat differently. Ben might be a very salty sweater. Sandra Godek's group works with the folks at the Philadelphia Eagles, and they measure the amount of salt that the athletes sweat out. They put sensors on them, and they actually measure that. And some of the linemen will sweat out 4 grams an hour. So you can't design a protocol for everyone. When you've got a lineman sweating out 4 grams an hour, then you need to give him 4 grams an hour of salt and find some way to get that to him with the carbohydrates necessary and the water necessary, and in a way that he can absorb it and not, like you said, have a reaction to it. So we set up a protocol for Ben, but at the same time, like I mentioned earlier, I don't invent this stuff. I'm not the PhD. I know what works for me, and I know what's the research. I actually called Sandra Godek's group and emailed them and then talked to them, and got on a conference call with Ben and one of their clinicians, and they talked Ben through how to prepare for the finals coming up, or for regionals and the finals coming up. And he's actually going to go to their clinic, and they're going to run the tests on him to see why he's exposed to this kind of thing. And I know not everybody can afford to do that, but there is some measure of benefit to employing not just the sodium intake, but the potassium
That's
intake.
why I've been waiting for a break here to ask about what are you doing for potassium?
Well, I think at a minimum, and this is important for everyone. This is important for regulating blood pressure. This is important for insulin. This is important for so many things. Potassium is the second biggest or most abundant electrolyte in the system, and most people don't get enough potassium. You need 4,700 milligrams a day, I'd say, just as an average individual. Now, if you're an athlete, I think you may need more than that if you're sweating a lot. And you're going to need to get that from some sources, the best ones that I suggest, and I include a list of potassium sources. One is potato, and it could be sweet potato, regular potato. Of course, that's going to have a calorie associated with it, so you got to be careful how much of them you eat. Potato also is a high satiety food, so I can't stuff too many potatoes in an athlete that has a high calorie demand because it might fill them up. So again, I've got to be cautious about how many potatoes you take in. I eat 2 potatoes a day, every single day, 2 medium potatoes. That's about 2,000 milligrams of potassium. Spinach, the next, I think, best source. And that one's not associated with calories. 10 ounces of spinach a day is around 1,500 to 1,700 milligrams of potassium. So you can see right there between the potatoes and the spinach, I'm already up to almost 4,000 milligrams of potassium. You get a little orange juice in there, and maybe a dose of salmon's 500 milligrams, OJ's 500 milligrams for a cup. So there's some great sources, I think, that could be easily obtained. But how many people eat spinach? Not too many people do, particularly all the meat necks out there lifting big weights. They don't need spinach. It doesn't have any calories in it. It's not a cow. It's not protein, but it's essential. And it's not just the potassium, which is a huge benefit, but the magnesium in spinach is also an enormous benefit. And there's calcium in there as well. Yeah. And vitamin K1 for
and calcium
clotting.
Is pretty important for muscle contractions. And
calcium's huge. We can keep going. And as long as we're talking about sodium, we cannot talk about salt without talking about calcium, because calcium helps regulate blood pressure as well. And to go way back to the original discussion about salt-sensitive people, the majority of those are just deficient in potassium and calcium. They might not be salt sensitive. And so you got to get calcium. And so I do put dairy in my diet. Well, people are afraid of lactose. Well, if you can't handle lactose with milk, then you can move on to a Greek yogurt. And if that's still too much, you can move on to a cheese. And if that's still too much, then you can move on to, I like an eggshell powder. Mm-hmm. But you can't talk about calcium without talking about vitamin D3. Because vitamin D3 increases calcium absorption, and so many people are deficient. Yeah. And I've been talking about this for a long, long time, for years with my athletes, and that's probably one of the things that I focus on first is adequate vitamin D3 supplementation.
We gotta take a slight detour there.
Yeah.
Because I talk to people that listen to you a lot, and this is not what you preach. So I just want to hear you say it yet again, but. I'll ask them, okay, what's your vitamin D levels? And they go, 10,000 IU. Yeah. And I go, no, what's your vitamin D levels? Yeah. No, I take 10,000 IU.
Right.
No. It's not what you take, what's absorbed.
Right.
What are they? Do you need it? Do you need more? Do you need less? And so
we're back to blood tests. You just don't know the answer of how much you need unless you get a blood test.
Too much is also bad.
Too much can be. Hypercalcemia can result from taking too much. Get a blood test. The range is generally acceptable. The range is 60 to 80. Your vitamin D25 hydroxy test. I think everybody should do it. If you can't afford a full panel for about $50, you can do just the vitamin D3. It's that important that I would do just that first if it was a cost issue, because it has such a huge impact on so many other things. Your sleep, your immune system, obviously your calcium absorption, your gut health. Vitamin D is one of the monsters.
But all these things are related. So, I mean,
they are.
In our discussion with Dr. Stasha Gomanek, like your B vitamins level being off and your microbiome being off can affect the vitamin D levels as well. And just correcting those can have an impact. So.
And that's why I talk about the micronutrient, the highly bioavailable micronutrient-dense foods that are in the diet, because you can satisfy a lot of these demands by not just looking at macros and understanding how important these are, how much potassium you get in. Hard to get enough D3 from food. And so, yes, I generally recommend to supplement it. And then K2, if you're going to take in D3 and you're going to have take in calcium, then you have to make sure the calcium's not being deposited in the soft tissues, in the arteries. And vitamin K2, which you can get from egg yolk and grass-fed butter and grass-fed cheeses, will help preferentially shuttle that K2. It can decalcify the arteries. And so you get the K2 in to shuttle that. So I tell people eat eggs, but preferentially egg yolks. The egg white has the avidin and tends to be the bigger culprit in terms of egg allergies. And people say, I can't eat eggs. I said, well, try just the yolk, because that's where most of the nutrients are anyhow. The micronutrients are anyhow. Satisfying a macro, a protein demand, you can do with just about anything and probably get a pretty similar effect. Except when you get to vegetables, you just need to eat a few more. Even things like the blends.
Another thing that you the myth that you dispelled is fresh fruits, and a lot of people stay away from that because they associate fruit with high fructose corn syrup.
Yes, there is that problem. They conflate the fructose in fruit with high fructose corn syrup, or just think that fructose in general is bad. Yeah. And the liver can handle about 75 to 100 grams of store about that much glycogen a day. And if you pound it with too much, it's going to convert that into fat, and you're going to have the fatty liver disease, sure. But if you can just eat enough to stimulate the liver, and by that I mean just like a piece of fruit a few times a day, then that becomes, and I have a very big section in my diet on this, and I recommend this to folks, is that becomes very stimulatory of metabolism. But to intake that fruit, fructose increases your body temperature. And when we talk about the amount of calories you burn, your BMR, and the amount of calories you burn at rest, fructose is a huge initiator of that. And it also, not fructose in general, but the fructose in fruit can increase body temperature, can help the health of the liver, which then improves your thyroid function. 80% of T4, the inactive form, is converted into T3 in the liver. And so now you're improving your thyroid function, you're improving your liver, just using these little doses. And so, plus your appetite, you improve your AST, ALT, your liver enzymes. Mm-hmm. And I know this as an athlete who abused his liver for many, many years, that, I've tried the milk thistle and I've tried the gallon of water a day and all that stuff. It has absolutely no effect. But when I started introducing fruit, I noticed that on my blood test, my AST and ALT would come down. And it was dosed in the right amount. It was 3 or 4 ounces of juice if 3 times a day, or it was half an orange or an orange 3 times a day. which is well under what your liver is capable of handling. But it had an enormous effect on my liver health and my metabolism. My energy levels are extraordinary. It's one of the first things people say about my diet is that they feel so much better, because they're taking in salt, and they're taking in iodine, and they're taking in fruit, and they're getting adequate calcium, which is also a huge stimulator for metabolism, is calcium. People don't know that. So I get the micronutrients in them in the absence of those multivitamins that they've been popping, which, as we know, most of them you can't even digest.
Yep.
And they're made from petroleum, and it's just garbage, the vast majority of it. And if you can get it from food, all of a sudden you just feel incredible. And then the workouts become fun again. And your performance is really a side effect of good nutrition.
So,
Yeah, I was going to say I think condense a lot of this. We're talking micronutrients, hydration, gut health. And one thing you mentioned in the intro was sleep hygiene, and that's not something that people talk about sleep in terms of quantity, almost independently of other factors. So define what sleep hygiene is and how that plays a role into all of this.
Well, the big one for me is that finding out, do you snore? Do you wake up tired? Because that's obviously going to impact your sleep quality. And so the first thing I do is find out if they snore, and have them get a CPAP immediately. And if they can go to a doctor and get that done and they have insurance and they can afford it, great. If not, I tell them to get on Craigslist and buy an auto PAP. They self-regulate how much air you need, and when you exhale, they quit blowing in. They're very comfortable. And sometimes I'll do that for them. I'll Google it on Craigslist in their area and send them a link and say, you need to buy this today. And we'll get them on a CPAP, and that can have a huge performance improving benefit. Because with apnea, not only is it just a matter of being tired, you lose an extraordinary amount of salt when you're holding your breath all night. And so now you're dehydrated as well. And you wake up and you have that kind of groggy feeling or the brain fog. It might not just be the sleep, it's the sodium depletion. Brain fog tends to be generally related to hydration and sodium depletion. And second from that is all the other benefits of sleep. As I think everybody saw the video recently with Joe Rogan and the sleep doctor that he was talking about the performance benefits, cardiovascularly, strength-wise. It's a linear in terms of its relationship to performance. When you get more sleep, you're stronger. Your cardiovascular is better. Your retention of skills is even better. When you're doing a skill type sport, it could be just shooting 3-pointers.
On the performance side, we know it's huge as lifters, but even more research is coming out now on the injury prevention side of things, and we're seeing studies done on reduced sleep, and it's almost a linear progression in terms of if you're getting under 6 hours of sleep or 5 or what, I can't remember what the exact figure was, but it was almost doubling, tripling your likelihood of injury, and this was on youth athletes even. So we're not even talking about people who have developed chronic things over their life. So even when people come to us with injuries or what, the first thing that we're even looking at is like how much you actually sleeping, not like
huge. Not
foam roll protocol or whatever they're interested in. It's like let's work on your sleep first.
And it seems to be the first corner that we cut. We need more hours in a day. That's the hours that we cut. And a lot of women in particular will get up really early in the morning to do their hour of cardio. And now they've just slowed their metabolism.
We're the only society in the world that intentionally deprives themselves of sleep.
The only species, I'd say.
Yeah, to supposedly get more done. And that kind of goes on to the next big piece that I talk when I get an athlete, and I'm like, look, how much you suffer doesn't translate to better performance. I know we've made ourselves think that over the years. Is who can torture themselves the most, and we're proud of it. We wear it as a badge of honor. We brag about it, how little sleep we've got, or how much we killed ourselves in any one given workout, as opposed to, nobody brags about the fact that I got 8 hours of sleep every night for the last 30 days and how incredible I feel as a result. But that's kind of what I focus on. I make them keep track of it. I make them tell me how many hours of sleep that they got and whether or not they're using their CPAP. These are the first questions I ask. I don't care about their lifting. It's not that important to me, because I know that's going to be great if all these other factors are controlled well. And in terms of sleep hygiene, I just tell them, look, and I had this conversation with Brian Shaw last week. They just had a new baby. And I'm like, dude, how's your sleep? Is the baby still in your room? and I don't make many friends with their wives. They generally hate me for that. But I tell them, look, you have to either sleep in the other room or get a nanny or wear a headset or whatever. But I've got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and so I get it. And I know they want to sleep with mom and dad, and they love it. but they move around like every 5 minutes, and you got a foot in your face, and they make these noises out of nowhere. I don't know where they come from. You know what I'm talking about. And it wakes you up. And if it doesn't completely wake you up, it'll easily take you out of stage 4 or REM.
My 7-month-old last night kept doing this all night.
Yeah.
Just
You
like
got
in her
no
sleep.
sleep.
She was just like
Tapping on it.
No
Just like-
sleep. Yeah. And so I actually address these things, and I'll tell the athlete at least 30 days before a competition, dude, you need to sleep in the other room. And if you can afford it, get a nanny so the nanny can watch the baby, just so you can get a good night's sleep. It's that critical. I don't care about their training at that point. I care about their sleep.
Good stuff.
So I got one. We're getting close to time, but I'm wondering, with your CrossFit and strongman athletes, are you doing anything with pH buffering?
I haven't implemented much with that. I do look at the vitamin C being very beneficial for decreasing the pH in the or the acidity of the blood, increasing pH, decreasing the acidity of the blood. That's probably the major contributor to that. But I haven't done anything in terms of supplementation.
Because you and I talked about like baking soda and some other methods like a long time.
What I found,
long time ago.
I tried it myself, and that's kind of why I don't implement it. It seems like an effective dose bothers the stomach.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the trade-off there. And so I didn't introduce it as part of their diet program. If I got them adequate potassium, if I got them adequate vitamin E, which helps with your cardiovascular. That's why you see these mountain climbers and discarded bottles of vitamin E. And if I can get them adequate vitamin C, then I think that we've controlled that.
I was just wondering. So
Yeah.
Because it's related to some prior discussions we've had.
Yeah. I didn't know if you had something you were going to teach me today. I was going to jump right on it. Because I'm always, I'm as bad as anybody. I'm always trying to find the hack or that one little thing. And what I keep coming back to is that if I can remedy deficiencies, if I can keep people from getting sodium depleted, if I can keep them from getting potassium depleted, and keep reiterating how important those things are, then they just seem to feel good all the time and then perform better as a result.
All right.
Yeah.
So where do people find the vertical diet?
The Vertical Diet. I got that, theverticaldiet.com. And then, of course, anything Stan Efferding, stanefferding.com, my Instagram. I have a Vertical Diet, the Vertical Diet Instagram. At Stan Efferding, so it's pretty easy to find. And we just started, I should mention, that's probably why I came here, is to talk about the Vertical Diet meal prep. So I went out.
Oh yeah,
I've never been a big supplement guy, and I've always wanted to be able to find a way that people could organize their meal planning and meal prep. And so I went out and I'm partnered with a great group of people who have an extensive history in meal prep, 20-year history of providing meals, over 4 million meals a year. Partnered with them, I met with their chefs and their dietitians, their registered dietitians. My partner's a PhD in biological sciences. And we put together a menu of vertical diet type foods, sourcing grass-fed bison and line-caught salmon and a bunch of the other ingredients that go into the vertical diet. And we started a meal prep delivered to all 48 states here and Canada soon. Within, I think, a week or two, we'll be in Canada as well. And that's available at theverticaldiet.com. And you can try our meals, and we'll deliver them right to your door. Our Monster Mash has been my signature series meal, my bison rice and bone broth. We couldn't find the bone broth that we wanted on the market, and so we bought all the equipment and started boiling our own bones and making our own homemade bone broth, so it didn't have all the additives and stuff in it. And same with, I didn't want to cook any of our food in vegetable oils, and so we started rendering our own beef tallow. And using that to cook some of our vegetables in and our eggs in, so it tastes
Really nice.
delicious. Using pink salt, our meals are not shy on salt. They're not shy on taste. They're delicious, and the company has invested millions of dollars into equipment to make just the most delicious food, and to package it and to flash freeze it, so when it arrives to you, it's extremely fresh. And I took 12 cases of it out to Chicago for George Lockhart and his team before the UFC 225. And even his chefs were eating it every single day and telling me how good it was. They were just shoveling it down. So calories be damned. If it tastes good, try it. And the verticaldiet.com meal prep is now delivered to your door.
It's actually pretty cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
And I also happen to know his entire stay itinerary on this trip, because he accidentally sent all the addresses for the vertical diet
Oh, yeah.
meal delivery and text
Isn't
message
that
to me.
funny?
It's like,
Yeah.
whoops, sorry, wrong person. I'm like,
So I reached out to my company. I travel a lot, and you guys travel a lot. You do a lot of these seminars.
Yeah.
When I land, there's usually a box of food waiting for me. It's a styrofoam container with the freezer packs waiting for me at the hotel. And when I went to Canada, the same thing. I had 3 days worth of meals already prepped. I just popped them into my microwave. I always stayed at a place with a little fridge and microwave. And so on this trip as well now, I've got all my meals are already done for me. I don't have to stop at restaurants, and I know my stomach's going to feel great the whole week. So, yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, we're running up against time at this point, but we're going to have you come back because there's so many things we didn't touch on. We'll have to. I'd love to hear more about the Shark Tank. Maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that must have been a fun experience. But anyway, thank you so much for being here today and sharing with us. It was great.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Yep, absolutely tremendous time talking to you. I at some point I got to hear how it is coaching two like Thor and Brian when they're going against each other. How that goes too.
It's awesome.
So.
They're great sports.
All right. Well, that's a wrap on Strength Chat. Yeah.
Thanks,
Stan.
guys.